Make sure everything works. And you can hear me, I think, because I hear echo coming back. So a couple of things in case you haven't been in this room before. If you go out those doors, there's a restroom just right there, men's and women's. So that's available if you want. What we're planning on doing tonight is going through the presentations that we prepared for tonight. So you'll hear me first, and then my colleagues will go, and then we'll open up for questions. At the same time, we also got some questions. So just wanted to let everybody in the room know how we're going to do that. We have microphones for asking the questions because we're recording it. So that way people can hear your question. So if you wouldn't mind, when you're ready for questions at the end, if you raise your hand, we'll bring you the microphone so you can ask your question, if that's appropriate or if that's okay. So at that, unless there's any other questions about the room and how we're running this program tonight. Seeing none, then we're going to start the recording and we'll get going. So thank you for coming. This is the Economic Fiscal Update, otherwise known as the Economic Fiscal 101. We started doing these roughly 4 years ago, in part because we wanted to kind of demystify the black box of how we do budgeting, the economics related to it, the fiscal related to it, and all of that. So this is the first of 5 different 101s we're doing this year. This one's the only one on Thursday. For the next 4 weeks in a row, on Wednesday nights, we'll be going through other subjects. The subjects are going to be the development activity in the community, economic vitality and development, then transportation, then elections, and then public safety. So those are available. You can see them. They'll be in here again, and they'll be recorded. So you can either come in person or you can watch them later. They are not live though. So I do want to let you know about that. If you have questions, we ask that if you have questions before, we ask that you send the questions 48 hours in advance, just so we can prepare. We did get some additional questions most over the last day. We're going to cover those tonight in our responses too. So just to let you know. So that's for everybody watching, that's how we're operating these and that's what we're doing. So at that, I'm going to begin the presentation. My name is Jeff Romine. I'm the Director of Economic Vitality. I also do development finance and I'm an economist. So in all those different roles that I have, one of the main things is to help the budget team and the finance team as they begin the development of the budget and as we think about our fiscal resources. So at that, that's why I'm covering the items I am tonight, is to prepare the budget team. And this is something we've talked about for several months. As you all know, the economy keeps changing rapidly. Last Friday, we got new releases of data and other things. So I try to incorporate those in, but we try to anticipate what that looks like when we make the final modifications. The budget, as my colleagues will point out, is what day it's going to be submitted into council for consideration. But on Tuesday night this week, we gave an overview and this exact same presentation to City Council. So real quickly, the reason why we do an economic update, as I mentioned, is to help that. But we also do it because the whole core of Broomfield has always been built on a fiscally sound approach. So we try to balance residential and business. We try to make sure we're bringing the development forward in a positive manner. And I'm going to talk about that because that was one of the questions that was sent in, was why do you do it that way when you see certain things going on? In part because, as we'll talk about within the property taxes, and sales tax, they're generated by the businesses. Oftentimes they're paid by the residents for going shopping and other things. So keeping those two in balance actually makes it so we're more fiscally sound. And it actually, over the years, has been something that this community has been a hallmark of. We've been able to keep our taxes low and steady for the last 20 years. And so our property tax mill rates, which is the thing that's the rate that's calculated, has stayed the same since formation of the city and county in 2001. And the same is true for the sales tax. They've been stable, the sales tax rate. So that's part of the reason for looking at both sides of the equation, because they are complementary coins. Next slide, please. So that we start with a quick overview of the nation and Colorado, because we are part of those. We're even part of the global economy. As you look to interlock, and if you look to the west on the other side of US 36, what you see is a number of international firms, and then some of our national firms and firms located here are working on an international environment. So it's really important to think about how all this fits together. As you probably know from reading various headlines and articles, for those of you interested in economics, the GDP is actually above last year's GDP growth. So the economy still continues to be strong. Population growth in the US is positive, as is employment. And as you can see, the unemployment rate is still at a very low level compared to what is normally considered full employment, which is roughly 4 and 4.5% historically. So we still have a very low unemployment rate in this nation. At the same time, we have a strong economy. And then the second part of it is always what I look at is in the work that I do is looking at the relationship between wage and salary increases and inflation change. And the reason for that is that helps us understand where the pressures are falling and how they're falling. And if wage and salaries are growing faster than inflation, then we know that inflation is likely going to catch up. If it goes the other direction, then we see that the households and individuals are making more and not being as affected by price change. So we're in a positive place in the nation now after several years where it was kind of reversed, or not kind of reversed, it was reversed. And so now we're seeing that alignment, which is why the Federal Reserve Bank and the Open Markets Committee is now starting to talk about possibly a interest rate change positively downward. And so if we see that, which is expected, hopefully in the fall of this year, one or two of those changes, that's a really positive sign. So the national economy is going strongly still. It's positive. And now we're starting to see that adjustment that the Federal Reserve Bank did really come into line. And so we hope that they'll see some interest rate easing. The Colorado economy is also very positive. It is growing slower than the US right now. When we came out of the recession, the COVID slowdown, we came out faster in Colorado. We came out faster in this metro area. So now what we're doing is we're slowing down a little bit, but the nation is picking up, but we're still in very positive territory. If you look over the last 3 years, Colorado's still doing better than the nation as a whole, but it is slow and they're catching us, I guess is the best way to phrase it. Our wage and salary increases have moderated a little bit more than the nation's, and so they're not growing quite as fast, and the inflation rate is actually moderated even more. Inflation rate is year over year, so as you can imagine, as we go into the winter, we're going to see inflation change a little bit because of energy prices and home heating and other things. But that gives you a quick snapshot. Next slide, please. As we look more specifically at Broomfield, because that's really what our interest level is, while we are part and parcel an element of all those things, we have our own economy and we have our own approach in the sense of how it all interacts. As we oftentimes tell people when they ask us, is about 80 to 85% of our employees are coming from outside the community in to work here for Broomfield firms, and roughly 80 to 85% of our residents go to other counties to work in. So they're driving, going to Boulder or Denver or Adams County, and vice versa, we have people commuting in. So we look at that interaction because that's really what a metropolitan area does, is you see a lot of positive interactions, employment, sales, all kinds of activities. Even our cultural and social activities are intertwined. If you go to a ballet or symphony, you're going to Denver, but at the same time, there are things that people come up here for, the hiking trails, just that we have, just wonderful open spaces. And so it allows this full interaction, both culturally, socially, and economically. Our population continues to grow. We continue to outpace the growth of the state of Colorado from a housing development standpoint and also population growth, and have been doing that for a number of years. Right now, we have 41,000 of our residents being employed somewhere else. That's out of 76,800. Now, the one thing I would note and why I pay attention to this, and you're going to hear me talk about it a little bit later, is the number of people that we have employed, the employed households, if you will, and the number of people in those households. That's an economic strength. That's part of that leads to why we have some of the highest median household incomes in the state of Colorado. So it really is something that's a foundational part, and it's just something about our fiscal resiliency and our ability to think about how we're building our economy. So that's something that we actually look at and pay attention to and report in our normal metrics. So as noted, you can see our wages, our household incomes. we are significantly higher than the state of Colorado on our wage levels that our firms are paying. And that's in part not just because we're very productive as a community, but we're well educated and we're productive and we're employed, and all of those things come together. And the reason for that is oftentimes because of the types of firms we have here and the types of jobs that they're creating and maintaining here in the community. So we're highly focused on information services and technology, finance, professional businesses or professional and business services. Those are those things that you see over that are being operated over in Interlochen and elsewhere around the community. And we have a higher concentration of those key industries. Those are the same targeted industries that the state of Colorado has. The state also includes aerospace, as do we. But as I described to City Council the other night, and as in talking to my colleagues at the state, aerospace is unique here in Colorado. It's not just all rockets. It is rockets, but there's other things being built. There's technologies that are going into those rockets, and that's what's going on here in our community and here in the state of Colorado. So when you think of aerospace, you oftentimes think of Florida and Texas and Alabama and Colorado. Those are the top 4 states in aerospace. Our portion is a little less of the physical side. We do it here with Ball Aerospace in Boulder, or now BAE Aerospace in Boulder and here in Broomfield. As well as United Launch in the southern part of the metropolitan area. But so much of the work we do in aerospace is the technology side and the design side. So it's captured actually in those other categories that I talked about earlier. So we have a higher and a stronger part of the economy. Our firms pay better. We have a higher and stronger education and productivity levels here in Broomfield than the state as a whole, and definitely above the US as a whole. So that's the real key points of this is, so my conclusion always is we're strong and we're sustaining. And that's really important. That is hard work to do. It's not as sexy as the headlines that you read every once in a while. This company located here, this company located there. We're really proud of the fact that our companies are growing here. And it's really an important part of the work that we do. Next slide, please. So speaking of that, here's a little bit of some comparisons just so you can get some sense. You know, everybody always wants to measure themselves. You know, we're not grading with a curve, but we look at what everybody else is doing. And here's a couple of those key statistics that are important. Broomfield business grew by 5.2%. That means the number of businesses grew. Broomfield's businesses tend to be larger, as pointed out in this slide. And so while we're not quite keeping up with the same business formation as Colorado, it's still very robust at above 5%. That's a very strong number, but it gives you some sense of comparison. So while Colorado's growing and creating a little bit more business formation than we are, our firms are larger on average. And we have firms that employ 500, we have firms employing 2. And so just like Colorado, it's across the range. It's always interesting to me as you think about the U.S. Small Business Administration, they consider every firm that's less than 500 employees a small business. I think we have one that's larger than that in Broomfield. So Colorado, Broomfield is a community of small business, although you look at those buildings and you're like, those are large businesses. But Vail Resorts and their total employment is larger, not here in Broomfield, but across the state of Colorado and across the U.S. So it gives you some sense of how we are, the types of ways that our business community comes together and the way that it's growing. And it really makes us very robust because we're not overly concentrated in one industry, nor overly concentrated with a single firm. We have a robust number of firms and we have a broad range of types of firms. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about property tax, just because it's something that we're paying attention to both on the residential side and commercial side. So there's been an awful lot written about residential property tax. We had open forums last year when we were talking about what those changes are and what that meant and why that was occurring. But people didn't talk as much about the commercial side. So I just wanted to add a couple of bullet points on this slide and in this presentation to discuss it. So in 2019, as you can read, Broomfield had about 18.3 million square feet of commercial space, of which about 5.1 million was office. In 2024, the most recent analysis that was done by the assessor that was released in April as the preliminary analysis. We're at 20.8 million square feet. So you can see we've grown roughly 2.5 million square feet over the last 5 years. And you can see what's going on with the office side. We have under construction right now about 1 million square feet of office of commercial space coming forward. It's at Sims Technology Park on the southwest side. It's up in Baseline on the northeast side. And so it's across the community. But here's the thing that we're paying attention to. Every headline over the last 2 years has been talking about how people work differently, how we're working from home. That was part of COVID, but even before that, people were increasingly working from home or working remotely or hybrid or going in 3 days a week and et cetera, et cetera. So that pattern really grew and strengthened in the COVID slowdown period, but it's still here and sustaining. And so what we see is that change, and it's going to be continuous. It's just going to be here forever. So the demand for office space in Colorado and Broomfield, across the nation, every central city it's much lower than it was. And so you're seeing massive vacancies like in downtown Denver. I had breakfast this morning with one of my colleagues in Denver who runs the business development program there. And we were just chatting about it. And, I shared that I had heard a couple of buildings that are hallmark buildings in the downtown are completely empty. And she said, actually, there's 5 right now that have nobody in them, which means you can imagine when we get to assessments, the value of those are going to go pretty close to zero, because there's just the way you do assessments is on commercial property is what is the income levels of them. And when they're not getting any rent, there's no income. So that's part of the reason why we are paying attention to it. Broomfield is the 3rd most concentrated community with office. It's Denver, Boulder, and Broomfield. Other communities have a significant office, but we're really very concentrated and very focused on it. So we have Interlochen, which is a very successful business park. As you can imagine, our friends down south also have really good things down the tech center. So I looked at, for the briefing of council, I wanted to just give them a heads up of what we see on the horizon. And so what you see in the second part is the market value of that same space. And so what you can see is roughly our commercial space is about 1/4 office. So that's a cloud on the horizon. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Next slide, please. So these are the influences that I always like to share with council and share with my colleagues in finance, just so that we know what we're all kind of paying attention. And in case there's something that I missed, this way we can bring it up. So there are several countries in Europe right now that are in recessions. Other countries in Europe, as well as Asia, which are primary markets, are in an economic slowdown in some cases compared to where they were. So that's a global influence that we have to pay attention to, again, because we have a number of global firms here. Everybody in the room knows interest rates are high, but several European countries have already started cutting rates. Their central banks have already begun cutting rates. So we expect our central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, to begin to cut rates soon. And the international markets are expecting that to occur. So that's really the influences from the global and macro side. Looking, more at the U.S. level, every economist that I know that I talk to, we're all surprised at the continuing strength of the U.S. consumers. What we're seeing, though, is while spending is still very positive, it's been shifting over the last couple of years. And so for right after COVID, what happened is everybody had a lot of money in savings. And so they started flying, they traveled, they bought things that they always wanted to. Once COVID and that slowdown went away, or generally went away, we began to see that kind of experience spending and that kind of pent up demand come through. The savings rates are now low again. That's not a good thing to say, but they are low again compared like they were in the teens, in the 2010s and beyond. And so the consumer is now kind of living out of their paychecks again. And so we expect some reductions in spending and some softening in it that will be impacting both our community but across the country. So that's what's going on with consumer behavior and confidence. Workforce concerns, there's a softening, as I already noted, in the job growth numbers. While it's still tight, in some regards, it is softening a little bit, and it's specifically around certain skills. We're still seeing some tightness, but it's still opening back up. And then I already mentioned that inflation is easing. You saw the numbers, and that is impacting and has positive impacts as we look forward. But, and this is, I always like to, I don't like to always say the buts, but it's always important to kind of put things in perspective. Obviously, prices are still high. Grocery prices grew a lot during the last 4 years. They're still high. They're not going to fall back very much. It's just they're not going to grow as much. That's what the inflation numbers really tell you. It doesn't say, hey, we're going back to 2019 prices, but it does say the 2026 prices or 2025 will not grow like we've just experienced over the last 4 years. So that's just, that's telling the truth, and that's kind of putting things into perspective of what they are. Next slide, please. So this community, historically, it's important to know where we came from as we think about where we're going. And so this community was built oftentimes with what some people refer to as greenfield development, which is new areas being developed for the first time. Increasingly over the last 5 years, and as we look forward, we're going to see more of a development on infill and redevelopment. You already see that in some parts of the community. You're seeing right now, if you just look out there, that you see Fowler Chevrolet, which formerly was referred to as Century Chevrolet, but Fowler Chevrolet, building a new facility right on their same site. They'll tear down the old one. So that's a case of redevelopment. If we look over at what was once referred to as Flatiron's Marketplace, which is just to the east side of the mall, and that shopping area, that used to be a big box center, and now it's becoming residential. And so we see this redevelopment. There's other projects that are filling in. So there was, a group of houses or businesses, and there's a vacant lot, and all of a sudden now that vacant lot is being developed. That's what infill is. So as we work with planning, as we work with developers, we recognize that change toward infill and redevelopment. And we also try to maintain that we're keeping that balanced development, keeping the commercial and the residential holding together, because without the commercial, and this is what we see with some of our other communities, then the residential property tax and sales tax have to carry a bigger burden. And so that by balancing that commercial and making sure that we're keeping that strong, it allows us to keep a very solid and sustainable level for the residential side, so that it doesn't have to grow up and increase it by any means. Next slide, please. So we talk about here in Broomfield, and we call them catalytic developments. They're major developments. They're really cool things. These are the three that we oftentimes talk about, because these are community priorities and areas that the community has wanted to see redevelopment occur, and for really interesting places. So these are the three what we call catalytic developments. We had to title them something, so that's what we use. But it's the Flatirons Crossing area, so that's the mall, as well as the environs around it. And so that is a redevelopment opportunity. And what you're seeing, if you go over there, everybody has over the last year, is you see some fencing. They tore down some buildings. Right now, they're getting ready to go into the ground and start their horizontal infrastructure for the new, what's coming behind that. And so that'll be rising up, and next year we'll start seeing the vertical rise up into the air. I just want to say this, we don't call this a redevelopment. We have to be really careful about calling it, because the mall is staying. The mall will continue to grow. They've been re-tenanting. There's a new store that's about to open that I don't quite understand, but it's a toy children's, it's just this really cool store that I guess is like the hot rage everywhere. But we also have Lululemon's opened up in there, North Face has opened up in there. So we see all kinds of great re-tenanting going on. So that's what's going on at Flatirons Crossing. Broomfield Town Square, that is the area immediately to our south between here and 120th. So that includes the former, for those who've been here more than a decade, although for everybody else, you probably heard it's phrased this way, the former Safeway building. So the Safeway did close there close to 10 years ago, but this is the redevelopment of that. And that is something the community has been focused on and wanting for a long period of time. We've been talking to the developer, and as the developer reported to City Council in the spring, they hope to, or they're planning on going into the ground and starting the horizontal infrastructure in 2025 with the goal of opening in 2027. So that project is moving forward. That's been long in the development and the pre-development and planning, but we believe it's coming forward in the near future, according to the developer. And then the final one that's up there is the first column, which is Center Street at baseline. And so baseline, for many of you may know, up on Colorado 7925, there's a large development. It's referred to as baseline. It'll include 9,000 housing units and close to 6 million square feet of commercial. But Center Street is that shopping area and that community center that's coming together. And so we have met with them and we've talked with them, and they believe they'll be able to move forward very rapidly now also. So more on that next week. Lynn Merwin, who's in back, who's going to raise her hand and wave at you all and say hi. But Lynn and I will be giving that presentation next Wednesday, again at 6 o'clock. See, that was a commercial. Next slide, please. So economic influences on the budgets. And this is my last slide, and then my colleagues will come up and talk a little bit more about the budgets and the fiscal status. But cost of services and programs, this is the how we hand off things. So I kind of help them figure out what I think is going to happen with labor costs and material costs and other things. We do know they're going to continue to rise. We hope they're going to be slowing, as we've seen with material costs have been slowing over the last couple of years. But nevertheless, it tends to grow faster than sales tax or property tax growth. So that's going to continue to put pressure on our budgets as we look forward. Labor availability, as I already mentioned, is easing. And so that's a positive. Infrastructure maintenance replacement. Remember when I talked about infill and redevelopment? So when you go into new ground and you put in a pipe or you lay a road or something like that, it's expensive, but it's pretty straightforward. When you go into a redevelopment or infill, you got to dig up something, you got to replace something. You're in tighter confines, et cetera, et cetera. So it tends to cost more to do infrastructure maintenance and replacement than it does to lay down new. And so that's become an important part. Broomfield is now a middle-aged community in Colorado. Colorado is a relatively new state for anybody that moved here from the East Coast. We don't have 200-year-old buildings, but we're now a community that's been around for about 60 years, and significant portions of our community have come on in the last 20 to 30 years. So we're now going into that maintenance cycle. So just as you think about your homes, water heaters don't last forever. Roofs oftentimes get replaced. Those are the types of maintenance that we're talking about, but at the city scale and the city types of replacement. Land construction costs, and more importantly, finance costs have still risen up. Land prices are not getting cheaper here in Colorado. Construction costs continue to stay high, unfortunately, and we hope that we'll see some easing on finance costs. Retail spending and retail sales tax is actually positive, and it's also still shifting to online. We saw that most recently last week when we were looking at the data, but that online shift still means, unlike what some people forecasted back in the economic slowdown of COVID, that nobody'd ever go into a bricks and mortar store again. We're going to all buy online. People are back in stores. We're seeing that, and it's positive for the city and county of Broomfield because of the mall, the grocery stores, Walmarts, et cetera. And then finally, I'm going to end on property tax. I've talked a little bit about it before, but property tax revenues are becoming uncertain. So many of you, you're all residents here, or many of you are residents here. And so you saw that rapid rise of values, of market values on homes over the last 4 to 6 years. And that resulted in the increase in property taxes that were sent through. There was some tax relief, but what we're hearing and what we know is there's 2 measures on potentially that may be coming down the Colorado ballot. There's also a special session next week that's been scheduled by the governor and the legislature to look at property taxes on the residential side. So the reason for putting this slide in was to help city council know that even though we have estimated what property tax revenues are going to look like next year and the year after, we don't know for certain because some of the rules may change. And how those rules change, that's going to affect the city budget. So it's important for finance and city council to know that. The one that's, as I mentioned to council on Tuesday night, the thing that's keeping me up more, and that's probably the first time I've been ever this concerned about it, is the change in property values that is coming from the commercial side downward, potentially downward in two years or so. So I was with the city and county of Denver when we had the Great Recession, and I saw what happened to property taxes there. Same thing happened up here. But then we saw the rebound about 2 to 3 years later, and it reestablished the values that we had seen before. Same thing happened with residential property during that Great Recession. This, what I've warned council and what I've been sharing internally with our team is whatever may be happening to the office market and the commercial markets, that's not going to be a rebound. I think that's going to be a sustained change. And so that's going to have long-term impacts on our property tax revenues. And where everyone needs to be thinking is and I'm just going to kind of end here, and I'm an economist. Sometimes we get to be doom and gloom, and I'm sorry about that. But where I'm really concerned is county services are primarily paid for in Colorado by property taxes. But the one that bothers me as much is I'm a parent. And yes, my kids are now out of K-12, they're in college, but our schools, our K-12 schools are paid for with property taxes. And that balance between commercial and residential has been a hallmark of the way that this state has tried to apply property taxes at the local communities and for school districts. That's something that we're going to be looking at and we're going to be talking about for the next 2 to 3 years. It's a major policy shift and a fiscal shift within the state. I wish I could end on a really positive note, but it's important to know both what's coming this coming year, and that is still very positive. We have a very strong economy, but there are these wins. And those of you who have gone to the tops of the mountains here in Colorado, when I go up there, one of the first things I do is as I'm getting close, I start looking far to the west to see what weather's rolling in, because it rolls in really fast. And if you see clouds on the horizons on a 14er, you start coming down. This is a cloud on the horizon. And so you have to start thinking through it. So on that, sorry it's not more positive, Graham, but I'm going to hand it off to Graham now. Graham Clark is our interim finance director, and he's going to start the presentation around finance and budget.
Thanks, Jeff. Next slide. Okay, here's our agenda for the fiscal part of the presentation. We'll be looking at our budget philosophy. We'll be looking at the revenue and expenditure outlook for the upcoming budget for 2025. We'll take a look at the CIP 2025 budget as well. We'll have a grant update, and that includes ARPA funds. ARPA funds were funds given to cities and counties during the COVID timeframe. And the city here, city and county, we received about $21 million. So I'll have an update on where that money's going. We'll also touch on BURRA, and BURRA is our Broomfield Urban Renewal Authority. And it's kind of a component of our budget as well with the city and county. And we'll talk about overall debt items. And lastly, we'll discuss next steps of the upcoming budget. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example, a table of our capital budget calendar. We do an operational budget at the same time. However, they are different processes and they include different things. It really is a year-long endeavor at this point. We start in January of 2024 to develop the 2025 budget. In the spring, the CIP staff, that's a lot of our engineers and our project managers, along with finance. They go through a prioritization process of what is needed as far as projects go for the next 5 years. The collaboration is extensive, and the details are many. We really get into the weeds and really get into a lot of costing, a lot of cost escalation, a lot of good information from our engineers here at the city and county on what to expect as far as costs go and the most important projects out there for the community. And then this time of year, we prepare in August for a recommendation, and then we get that recommendation over to council in early September. Next slide. So you may have heard the #1 goal of the community is fiscal sustainability and resilience. What does that mean? It means that the residents and the staff here take this economic and fiscal information and all the budgeting and all the ways that we spend our money, we take it very seriously. And we, on the finance staff, come in every day and we make it a priority. So some of the results of this approach, you can see here at the bottom in the bullet points. In 2025, we're going to have a 20% operational reserve that's in our proposed 2025 budget that'll be out in a couple weeks. We also have our sales and use tax that was upgraded last year. That's a bond that we have for, I think it was 144th Avenue, a larger project. That was a bond, and that's was upgraded last year, and it's also on the watch list for being upgraded again this year because sales and use tax and the revenue coming from that is pretty strong. Next slide. Something to note here is that governmental finance does have different buckets and different ways that you can spend the money. And there's quite a bit of different rules that are associated with different funds and funding sources. And so here you can see our governmental funds on the far left in blue. And then we've got the enterprise funds. That's been a topic of conversation lately. You can't use governmental funds for the enterprise funds and vice versa. There's certain rules that go with that. And then on the far right, you'll see fiduciary funds. Fiduciary funds are funds that we get because we get the property taxes and we get the property tax revenue from all the different property tax payments that are done online and in person. But a lot of those property taxes, we actually just send right out to the school districts and the fire districts. So it's really just, you can think of it as a pass-through is a good way to think of it. And it's not something, it makes our budget look very large, but it's something that we actually just give to the school districts and fire districts almost immediately. Next slide. So as we look at our revenue outlook, Jeff touched on this a little bit for 2024 year to date. And as we look forward to 2025, we're anticipating low but consistent growth with the property taxes, at least for 2025, because 2025 is not an assessment year. So it's very similar to 2024. The only difference is that increases could come from growth or redevelopment. And so we're just projecting a 1% increase over 2024. Sales growth is projected to have a moderate growth at 3.9% for the city overall for 2025. Next slide. Here you can see the proposed 2025 revenues, which are similar to the 2024 revised. And on the right-hand table, you can see where the revenues actually come from. So you can see that charges for services is about 36%. What that is a lot of the utility bills and activities at the rec center. The number 2 revenue generator for the city and county is the sales tax component. That's the piece that'll be going up 3.9% this next year projected. And then property tax is third at 24%. And you can see some other ones that are smaller right below that. Next slide. That was kind of a small tidbit on our revenues. Now we'll shift over to look at expenditures. And this chart is all the expenses for CCOB for the 2025 proposed budget. And as you can see, this includes the fiduciary funds. Those are those pass-through ones I just talked about. And it's the largest component of the overall budget. And so that's the one in yellow there. And those are the ones that are essentially pass-throughs. You can see the operations are next, and then the enterprise funds are also a big component of our overall budget. Next slide. So how does our governmental and enterprise funds, our overall budget, how does that compare to previous years? The proposed 2025 budget, which will be viewable in a couple of weeks, has constrained growth on the expenditure side. And you can see that the proposed 2025 budget is very similar to that of the original 2024 budget. And so we're focusing a lot more on reallocation of the current budget of 2024 as opposed to new items for 2025. The only difference here, you can see the blue section there gets a little bit larger, and that's from our capital carryover. So those are projects that maybe started in one year, but they're multi-year projects and they don't end until later on, a year or two down the line. And so that's that carryover component that you can see the increase in blue. Next slide. So this slide shows our general governmental expenses. That's without the enterprise, without the fiduciary funds. And you can see that it's largely personnel. And so the personnel part is the day-to-day operations of the city and county. And much of the governmental funds, as you can see, are both the personnel, HHS benefits, that's health and human service benefits, and contracted services. And so a lot of those are fixed costs that just happen every year. And so you can see that a lot of our costs every year are fixed, meaning there's not a whole lot of variability between year to year. So this next slide shows when we're looking at the enterprise fund specifically, you'll see a large component of the enterprise funds are capital. And David will touch on this in a little bit as he gets into some more details around the capital outlay, but you can see about half of the enterprise funds relate to capital, and that's usually repair and replacement of existing infrastructure and sometimes some growth or we've got a big wastewater facility plan coming, and that's kind of an expansion of the wastewater facility due to federal mandates. And so that's a big portion of the capital. You'll see the contractual piece there at 26.8%. A big piece of that is the water that we have a contract to get from Denver Water. And so we get an allotment from Denver Water each year. We pay a cost, and then that cost, they kind of dictate the costs a little bit. And we had in the budget, for instance, last year, we had a 4% increase because that's what we proposed or projected, thought it would be, and it ended up being 7%. So that's kind of a piece that we don't have a whole lot of control over. That was the blue piece. Next slide. Here's an interesting look at the historical personnel per 1,000 FTEs. So that's kind of a pretty standard look that a lot of governments look at per 1,000 of population. What's your FTE outlook? And so you can see it's been in the 11s for most of the 2010s, and we're still in the 11s. Getting closer to 12, but that's a good indicator that our personnel is going up, but only because there's more people and more services to provide. Next slide. Here's what we were talking a little bit about BURA. Here's a slide. BURA is basically what we're doing with BURA in 2024 is we're going to have a refinance of a bond for BURA. And that's basically changing it from a variable rate, which it is right now, to a fixed rate, which will help for the coming years as we, and that's in regards to the event center. And so that will be happening at the end of the year where we'll do a reissuance of that bond. Next slide. And this is the Broomfield debt overall. So all of our obligations, you can see the general obligations are in blue in the top three. That's more for our sales and use tax is the backing for those particular bonds. And then the green is the enterprise funds. And then at the bottom is the BURA one that we just discussed. We do intend to have new issuances of bonds in 2026, two for the enterprise funds, which is the wastewater expansion facility that I just talked about a little bit earlier, and then some water tanks that will be on the horizon for 2026. We're also intending on issuing bonds for a new police and courts building in 2026. Next slide. Our finance team is in charge of grant management, and that's something that we've worked hard on over the last year, is the grant management, trying to get a hold of all the different grants that we have at the city and county of Broomfield. And you can see about $18.7 million. These are CIP-related grants, so a lot of these are transportation grants. CDOT has a fair amount of funding that we are able to acquire. And so 18.7 is generally a pretty good number for a city and county this size. And then you can see the total budget is about 30 million. And a lot of these transportation grants, how it works is they're 80% federally funded and 20% local match. So you can see that that additional $12 million there roughly is kind of that 20% match that we have. Next slide. I wanted to talk about ARPA a little bit. You can kind of see there's a very big number there in the middle, and that's the ARPA money. It's 20.7 million for ARPA and then another million for the Broncos settlement. But even taking out the ARPA money, which is a big kind of one-time component, we still have an additional $7 million of other non-CIP related grants. And you can see a lot of the departments are active in trying to acquire grants, and there's a thorough process where each department has somebody that looks at different grant opportunities and figures out if it's something that would be applicable to Broomfield. Next slide. This is just a little bit more of a detailed breakdown of the ARPA funds. Again, it's 20 million. The ARPA funds, they do need to be encumbered by December of this year, which we're on track to do. And then as a federal requirement, all funding must be spent by December 31st of 2026. Also something that we're fully intending on spending by that time. So that's a quick look at some of the fiscal items, and my colleague David is going to come up and talk a little bit more about capital. Thank you.
Graham. My name is David Acevedo Yates. I am the Deputy Director of Finance. First, I just wanted to take a moment to point out our finance team, and in particular our budget team, represented here by Nathan in the back there. You know, I've been here for 7 months, and I've had the absolute privilege to work with and get to know them on a personal level, and their dedication to Broomfield has really stood out to me. And so just from my perspective, you know, the amount of work and the effort that they've put into designing, not just throughout the year, the budget and all of the transactions that go through here, but planning the budget for next year has been absolutely amazing. And so I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to work with everyone here. So just wanted to start off there. So I'll begin on the next slide with our capital improvement plan, and or you know, we'll just call it CIP, and these are capital projects that we have throughout the city. In reviewing our CIP projects, we focus on 4 buckets outlined here on this chart: mandates, obligations, critical, and other. As we evaluate through these 4 buckets, it's vital for our understanding of Broomfield's responsibilities to be able to categorize each of these projects based on these different categories. Here we see all of Broomfield's CIP projects, including enterprise and all funds, and how they're all projected to fall into each category in 2025. It's important to note that obligation and mandates are projected to make up 66% of the total CIP budget in 2025, which is an increase of 10% over 2024. Understanding this breakdown helps our organization ensure that we're able to prioritize our mandates and obligations while still meeting our critical needs and assessing our ability to take on projects outside of these 3 categories. Next slide, please. As we mature as a community, and Jeff pointed this out, you know, we realize that over the last 20 to 30 years, our assets are in need of maintenance and repair. So this chart shows our commitment over the last couple of years to go from focusing on new to really focusing on repairing and replacing our declining assets. This is a goal of all CIP, including enterprise. The percentages here are by share of the CIP budget for each specific year. So while the amounts that are budgeted in each year differ, really what we're looking at is the trajectory And here you're seeing that reflection in how those lines are moving in our intentional decisions on how to use our finite resources to prioritize projects based on a review of our current assets first. In 2024, we're on track to be near a even split between between new assets and asset repair and replacement. In 2025, we project that we'll not only cross that midpoint, but we will shift to a primary focus on replacement and rehabilitation of our current assets. This shift is extremely important. As we build new assets, those assets quickly move into a maintenance system and then eventually move into repair. So ensuring that we're shifting our focus to that repair and replacement mindset is vital as we continue to move on in the years. As we reach build out and as we assess the ever-changing economic landscape, we have to change our approach to capital projects based on current relevant factors, and reviewing this metric periodically really showcases that our decisions are aligned with our priorities. Next slide, please. Here we highlight some of the projects in our general CIP budget that will be ongoing from 2024 into 2025 or beginning in 2025. As we can see, many projects span multiple years. And in addition, we encumber the full project funds up front. Since these projects span multiple budget years, an important action we take each year is to actually roll over these encumbered budgets from one year to the next. These funds are funds that have been planned for and are in our CIP long-range plan. Here we can see the bay renovation, which just recently started. It'll be an anticipated completion date in 2025 with a delayed start, probably aiming for 4th of July for an opening. Also listed here is our police and courts building expansion, which is slated to begin design in 2025 with a budget of $3.8 million. This is only the design portion of the budget, and as design progresses, we'll have a clearer picture of the actual total construction costs that we'll plan for as that becomes clearer to us. Again, this emphasizes, looking at this list, this emphasizes our need to approach each project with intention and the need to plan years ahead and review and revise those plans as we move forward and as Broomfield's needs change. Next slide, please. In this slide, we focus on enterprise CIP projects. We can see the first phase of the wastewater treatment facility, which is planned to complete design in 2025 and begin construction late 2025 or early 2026. This project will span multiple budget years and again, underscores that importance of remaining disciplined in our approach to budget year over year to ensure that we have available resources throughout the life of the project. As Jeff mentioned, infrastructure maintenance and replacement is increasingly needed and costly. Our 2024 and 2025 CIP budgets reflect that. And our budget approach aligns with our budget philosophy, as Graham outlined earlier, and with the needs of Broomfield. Next slide, please. So that's just some highlights of our CIP budget. We will have coming up on September 4th, we'll provide council with the 2024 revised and the 2025 proposed operating and capital budgets via email. On September 10th, those same documents will be available to the general public for viewing. September 12th, we'll have a council study session. And then September 19th, we'll have another council study session. October 1st will be the first reading of the 2024 revised and 2025 proposed operating capital budget and utility rate increases. In 2026, we'll have the second reading with the planned adoption of both of those budgets, the 2024 revised the 2025 proposed operating and capital, including the utility rate increases. Next slide, please. So I just want to thank everyone for being here and those watching, and we'll go ahead and take some questions if there's any here. And then I know we have some questions that were submitted online as well. So thank you.
There we go. I'm Anna Burton-Zetti, so I'm one of the two co-directors for community development. And I will ask the questions. It's kind of a team effort probably with these. The first one, these were all received from the Broomfield Voice website. The first is, being that the council voted to give $2 million of the Housing Programs Fund, this was $2 million to the Ulysses development. Is there any money left for 2024? And will this be fully funded for 2025?
So for those of you who don't know, the Ulysses Housing project is going to be is being proposed. It is seeking both state funding as well as some gap funding from the local government, in our case, Broomfield. We'll be providing that funding through the Housing Development Fund. The Housing Development Fund was established by the City Council, which is where we collect the money from the cash in lieu payments. So cash in lieu payments, I'm sorry if I have to unwind this a bit, but just to make so that everybody's clear, the cash in lieu payments are paid for developments that have come forward. They are required to provide certain amounts of affordability within those projects. So they do market rate units and affordable units. If they decide not to provide the affordable units, they can pay cash in lieu. That money all went into this Housing Development Fund. We use that then to fund projects to build affordable housing, or what we refer to as income-aligned housing. So that money, we had roughly $3.3 million of funding in that program, or in that fund right now. So the $2 million that City Council approved is coming out of that, which would leave somewhere around $1.5 million roughly. And so what we're doing is we're doing an analysis right now as we finish up the partial property tax refund program to see what was needed and what was utilized this year. Once we have that program concluded, we'll do that sum up, and then we'll know how much money we're going to have available for 2025. Right now, we have roughly, as I say, $1.3 to $1.5 million. And that would fund most of the programs that are already in place and approved. I would just note one thing. The partial property tax refund program that was approved by City Council was for one portion of it to be in place for up to 2 years. That 2 years is ending, and the other one we did it as a 1-year effort. And so that'll be coming forward to City Council for their consideration in December. If they decide to fund it and continue that program, then that's where we'd utilize the money from. So right now, we don't have quite enough to pay for all of the programs that we have in place for next year, but we believe we're very close, but we'll bring that to council for their consideration in December after we do the program summary and all of that.
Thank you. Next question. Why are we prioritizing commercial over residential if 80% of Broomfield's workforce works outside the city? Are you prioritizing the wrong businesses to come to Broomfield?
So thank you, whoever asked that question. I'm sorry. Thank you, Anna, for that. That's interesting question. No. And again, we're referencing back to that property tax. So as Graham pointed out in his slide, you notice that roughly 30% of our revenue, our general fund revenue is coming, or of our revenues are coming from sales tax. Our second largest tax source is property tax. And so what we're trying to do on the property tax side is balance that so that relatively equal portions are coming from the commercial side and the residential side. We don't get to set. The state of Colorado sets the assessment rates. The City Council, if they wanted to, they'd have to come to the voters for an increase in mills, but the City Council and the voters set the mill rates. And so the way that we can manage to try to keep that balance is by encouraging commercial development at a same relationship or ratio as residential development. So the reason for doing that is literally to kind of keep, is to keep the property taxes reasonable and to make sure that we have the funds available. At the same time, the second part of that question was talking about what sectors we focus on. So what Broomfield and what we have continued to do is focus on what we call foundational or base businesses. So those things that bring jobs, bring spending to our community. That is one of our fundamental parts of growing our economy. So those companies that you see over in Interlock and the companies you see along 36, those are those core businesses. At the same time, the community and city council continue to emphasize that we should be bringing and seeking the right kinds of residential and dining options. So if you notice, we've announced a couple of recent restaurants that have opened, and so those generate sales tax. Our sales tax, as you can imagine, and this is true for you when you go shopping, if you shop in another community, you're paying sales tax to that community. So the businesses at Flatirons Crossing are collecting Broomfield sales tax from whoever shops there. So having the right kinds of retail and restaurants is actually generating inflow of sales tax from some other parts of the metropolitan area. So that's the reason for focusing the way we do on some of the business efforts is from a fiscal sustainability standpoint, as well as job creation. So it's just not focused purely on job creation. Oh, sir.
Well, that really didn't answer the question. The question was.
Sorry, I hate to.
Oh, that's all right. The question was, we talk about trying to balance it 50-50, but if 85% of the people in Broomfield work outside of Broomfield, that doesn't compute at all.
Well, the property, so again.
Go ahead.
So the property tax, which is collected from the properties here, that is the purpose of focusing on the commercial side. The fact that you may choose, people choose to work wherever they choose to work, that's helping them own their homes and things like that. But we're really trying to build up that commercial property tax generation. That's why we're focusing the way we are. They're related, but different. One is a fiscal outcome and one, I think, is to your point, is people are living and working elsewhere, and reverse too. We have lots of people coming from Denver and Boulder working here in the same way. It's an interesting phenomena because we're a metropolitan area. So it's really a fiscal question. In part is, I think I'm not sure if you're asking why we're doing it from the commercial stand or from the fiscal standpoint.
Not bringing the right kinds of business into Broomfield where people will stay. Broomfield people will work here at the businesses that we bring in, not have to go outside of.
And stay at the restaurant, the stores.
Yeah, and those are the
and
people,
going elsewhere.
those people that live here are shopping. That's what we saw actually in COVID, interestingly enough. So the resident spending continued to rise from COVID because of all these people that live here. The people that are working in those businesses do shop here a little bit, but not to the same degree, I think is your point. And if we could increase the number of people living and working here, that could be positive. So we try to grow those businesses. We don't get to tell, those businesses whom to hire. I think that's the best way I can answer the question. I'm sorry.
Restaurants here in Broomfield. How many Mexican restaurants do we have? How many McDonald's? How many Burger King? How many Wendy's? I don't think we need one on each corner. We should be building businesses or building restaurants that are unique and can bring people here.
And I think that
I'm just going to repeat the question since it probably wasn't picked up for those on the recording. Sorry.
Sure. I think the question really is the example was using restaurants, but the example is are the types of businesses that we're encouraging to locate here serving the residents. And so the examples that I would use is the Lululemon as a retail store, Cherry Cricket Burgers, which is a sit-down restaurant that will be taking over the former Old Chicago. Those are examples of restaurants and retail that we brought to the community recently to encourage people to stay here and shop and stay here and eat. And we'll continue to do that. And you'll hear more of some of those coming forward in the future. So we do agree with that. We continue to work on that. So. Yeah.
Yep. Next question was, why are the roads, parks in Broomfield in such poor shape if everyone works out of town? I rarely see any road work being done to improve the roads or parks like in previous years. And so, Graham, do you want to talk about the budgeting for public works? So I'll let you take a shot and then I may add in.
Yeah, Curtis, if you can go back to that ARPA slide, that would be great. We received about $20 million in ARPA funding. And we spend quite a bit of that money on the pavement management program. And our Public Works Department does do a pretty thorough job of understanding what the PCI or the status or the can't think of the word right now, but basically how good, what's that? The condition. Yeah, sorry. Excuse me. The condition of the pavement. So they do a lot of condition assessment, and they go out to the roads that are most important. You can see that Midway was just done recently. That was done really well. So if you look on here, you can see at the very bottom, the pavement management piece. We've got $9.6 million so almost half of the money that we got from our ARPA money, we're spending on the pavement management piece. And so our public works staff, they do understand where to go, and they understand what the conditions are, and they move every year to the spot that they feel is most important. So it looks like our city manager is coming up to answer as well.
I wanted to answer. So we know that those ARPA funds are one-time dollars. So Broomfield made the choice early on that we were not going to spend those ARPA dollars. Plus there was a really defined way to spend those ARPA dollars, where you could spend them, under what circumstances you could spend them. So in addition to the pavement, it's really about the consistency of having pre-planned budget for parks, for recs, for the pavement. And part of that comes, I don't know if you all have had an opportunity, but in our community update, when the community said the #1 goal for Broomfield should be now and moving forward until it's redetermined to be some other priority, is fiscal sustainability. Under fiscal sustainability, we have key performance indicators so that we can track if we're moving the needle in any one of these particular areas. One of them, to your point, sir, was the shifting of the 80-20. How much money do we spend on the new, and how much money do we spend on asset management? What does asset management mean? Asset management includes our roads. So over the last 3 years, we've prioritized, as Mr. Clark had said previously, into 3 primary buckets, and that is mandates, obligations, and critical functions. Critical functions includes public works and the police department. Significantly shifting that needle, we can track that. It's that old adage, you put your money where your mouth is. And being able to ensure that PD and public works is one of the first 5 primary budget items for our 2022 budget, 2023 budget, 2024 budget, and you'll see it again in 2025. When you come on, and just one clarification, we had an individual ask last night that when City Council receives the budget on September 5th, that everybody should receive that budget on September 5th, so everybody has an opportunity to go through it before the council meeting. So just to clarify, that full budget will be released on September 5th. In that, you will see the shift into the public works, into the specific roads. Part of and the last piece that I'll say about that is clearly defining those three buckets is critical for Broomfield. It's critical because our volatile revenue stream coming into the general fund continues to be volatile and will only increase in volatility. So if we don't prioritize on the front end, instead of taking that pot of money and doing the distribution, we have to have some mechanisms to be able to really clearly identify, and our staff has to be in alignment. We have to structure our staff in alignment to ensure that those three buckets are filled first. So part of that, I understand fundamentally now why city managers have to live in the community. I didn't really understand it before. I understand it now, not just because of the state of the roads, but because of the timing of the lights. Because when the sprinkler is sprinkling off, right, I immediately find myself being one of those people. And priding ourselves on being able to say that we do prioritize that. So right when we started prioritizing it was when we had one of the very wettest years in Broomfield. Another thing I didn't understand that I'm well versed with now with regards to public works is the cadence with which we do crack, seal improvements, repaving, regrading, and full pavements. So having that capability, and there's only a certain time period that you can do each one of those pieces. Thus, another important reason to be able to, that you're not trying to find the money at any particular time, that when you have it in the pipeline, that you're ready to pull the trigger as soon as the weather gets where it needs to get. And again, capitalizing in that opportune moment. It can't be too hot. It can't be too cold. It can't be too wet. So it's, I hope to have this conversation again with the two of you sitting right there in those chairs next year to actually acknowledge the tangible outcome of what these prioritizations with those three categories look like and mean, and that you're able to see it. Oh, that was a long, okay.
So that was all the questions we received in advance that I had. So we do have a little bit of time. If anyone had questions, we just need to make sure they're in the microphone so that they get picked up for the recording.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm unsure about where is the baseline center? What is that baseline center and where is it located at?
So the baseline development is located at the southwest corner of Colorado and I-25 in Northeast Broomfield. Sure. Southwest corner of Colorado 7 and I-25. So if you come across in Colorado 7, the area in between Sheridan and I-25, that is baseline, north of the Northwest Parkway, Toll Road Parkway. So that's that area up in Northeast Broomfield. And Center Street would be located on the western side of that at basically Sheridan, starts at Sheridan and comes east from there. Not all the way to the highway, over to what would be considered roughly Huron. So about halfway across that property.
Ms. Bertanzetti, do you have the, if maybe we could write it down, the Broomfield Voice page?
I don't know that I have that. Let me look it up real quick.
So on at broomfield.org, Broomfield Voice, we have all of our projects. It's a multitude of projects, but it has graphics, it has visuals, it has aerials to give you points of reference of exactly where it is, but it also has consistent updates on that development of what's happening, council approvals, development updates, performas. It's a vast amount of information. I'll write it down and give it to you.
So if I can just, I'm just going to say it for the recording for anyone else listening. So that was Broomfield Voice, all one word, .com/. /baseline center street districts and district. And it's hyphenated. So broomfieldvoice.com and then baseline center street district with hyphens. We can write that down for anyone in attendance as well.
I was also confused or wondering about what is the service center remodel? What is the service center?
So the service center, I think the one that you might be referring to is the one I was referring to during my presentation, which is called the wastewater expansion facility. And that's a very large, yeah, you may have heard our director, Ken Rutt of Public Works, talk about all the federal mandates yesterday at his meeting and all the different related items that have to do with the federal mandates. Good $226 million of the $523 million project is dictated by federal mandates. And so that's what we're referring to. That's also the big project that we're intending on bonding for in 2026. So it's a complete expansion of basically our wastewater facilities, sewer. Yeah.
No, that one is at 126th, 5th.
It's right by Crofton Park, which is where I live. So it's right off of Lowell and 125th. Yep. Exactly right. Yeah. You see my little casita right there. Yes, that's the, yeah, where the branch drop off is, if you've ever been over there.
One other question is, do we know what's going on with the event center that's being torn down and what's going in there?
You're full of great questions. All three of these we talked about just today.
So
Did you?
I will just let you know, so we're bringing to City Council next week a report on the event center demolition. So that'll be coming forward. That packet is now available. It's on our website, I believe. So you can look at that council agenda and you can see the memo there actually. What we're talking about there is how to tear it down. As far as at the end of that presentation, we're going to do just a quick update to City Council on the go forward, what do we do to replace it. So that's this coming Tuesday. It's sadly, I know specifically the agenda item, it's 5B in the agenda packet. And the memo is attached because I was looking at it earlier. But Tuesday, August 27th.
So the 27th isn't going to be super exciting. There's a Broomfield Voice page. So when you're looking for baseline Center Street District, you can also look for the event center. So the event center is on 11 acres. Once it's demolished, we are and have been over the last 12 months developing an RFP, which is a request for proposal for the developers, not just in Colorado, but throughout the nation, in order to bring something to the community that I'm just going to be very blunt, that it has to make money. Whatever goes in there has to be a revenue generator. That's number one. And number two is activating, continuing to activate that site. So mixed use, commercial, not light industrial, but again, entertainment, eatery. So that's really it's the goal and the focus. We're just not quite there yet, but we want to have a pretty swift cadence when it does come down, that we are able to come back to our council and come back to the community with an executable plan. Ms. Burton-Zetti.
No, actually, I don't have anything to add there, really. I think that summarizes it really well. August 27th, we'll have more discussion.
Sorry about that. you talked about a 20% operational reserve last night. Is that one of the buckets that you talked about last night? That you said?
Mm-hmm. It is. So that reserve is, it comes off of the top. So that reserve amount comes before even those three buckets. That is the, yes, that is the, if we tap into a reserve, it is for a catastrophic weather event, or our public safety systems are wiped out. Yeah, so some people refer to that as a rainy day fund. That's not a rainy day fund. It is it's a catastrophic failure fund. So yeah, thank you for that clarification. It's another one of those. You're not tempted to utilize it or spend it if it comes right off of the top. And so that has been another, again, if you're able to look at that, and that's on the broomfield.org as well, which is the community goal document. There's 5 goals. Each have corresponding key performance indicators that are attached back. And then we update it every year to ensure that A, we're measuring the right things. We're not counting widgets just to count widgets. But what we're doing is moving the needle. And by moving the needle, we're aligning it with budget. And so the reserves, along with, don't mess with the bond ratings. It's through that fiscal sustainability filter that other decisions primarily should be made. And that reserve is one of them. So we've been able to go, the mandate is 10%. During COVID, we were at 16%. We made the decision at that time. I know it seems counterintuitive, but sometimes the most important time to save is when it's the most difficult to save, because then that discipline becomes reinforced. And then when you do come into the better times, you already have that structure of savings. So we've been able to increase from the mandate of 10% to 6.7% to 18% this year. And 2025 we'll reach the level of the goal, which is 20%.
That answered my question. Graham, you showed one of the slides one of your slides showed, sorry, where all the money was going. I remember the one thing, I couldn't get the picture quick enough on my phone, it blurred out. The cemetery was in there, so it kind of showed all the different branches of what paid for what. Is it possible to get a copy of that?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I believe we also will have the presentation available on our website. And if anyone was interested, this is the same presentation that was provided on Tuesday. So it's already on the website. If you look at the City Council agendas website and then go down to presentations, there's another, so it is there as well. Any other?
One more.
Yeah, got time for probably one or two more questions.
Did you have
you
a
had-
Go ahead.
No,
Marco.
No, I work here.
Oh. Oh, you don't get to ask
I didn't
questions.
think.
This is just kind of a blunt question. How much does it cost us every month for Safeway and the First Event Center? How much money is that costing Broomfield every month?
So we don't, there is no real cost every month. We did replace the roof because the roof had deteriorated. We took possession of it roughly 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And I can get the specific date, but we purchased it from Safeway at that point. And then there has been some maintenance in it, but we pretty much shut down the building, including some of the characteristics. The only thing that had happened is there was deterioration in the roof, and so we replaced that roof. That's really the most major expense we've made. That cost us close to $1 million this year. But that is something that after 8 years, we felt we had to do from a public safety and kind of do it. We had a long conversation with the eventual developer of Broomfield Town Square. And so we have a cost sharing agreement with that. So when they move forward, we'll be reimbursed 50% of that money. So they felt that building in its existing condition even was still an important asset, and worth more than the money we'd spend on the roof replacement. So that's how it went through. Council approved that about 9 months ago, if I recall, and we've completed that work now. But we don't have an ongoing every month expense related to it, as you would think. The event center, we do have some outstanding expense, or we have some ongoing expenses that are part of the obligations from it. What we were doing there, and we did do a full briefing to city council, I think more than once, on kind of the conditions and what that go forward was going to look like. And just to summarize that, council approved that we would continue to make those payments while we have the building. Once the building comes down, then some of those payments go away. That's the rush, not the rush, but that's why we're being very forward with the demolition rather than keeping it up, because it reduces our expenses. So that's part of the reason for the demolition is otherwise we'd have additional exposure in a way that we didn't think made prudent sense.
That bond payment is close to $5 million a year. There is a balloon payment in 2029 that will finish paying off those bonds. All said, for the event center, it'll be a total of $135 million for the event center. So we look forward to having those bonds exhausted. 2029 or 2030, I'm sorry. I might have.
Yeah, 2030.
And I just want you to, want folks to know, when Jennifer talks about that exposure and that 135 million, that money primarily came out of the URA that is funded that. That's not coming out of this City and County of Broomfield's general fund. So that's not there. It's coming in from a different funding source. Doesn't negate the fact that it's 135 million. I'm not trying to do that, but I just wanted to add clarity.
Appreciate that.
It's not a general fund expense.
We sure appreciate your time. And just real quickly, Anna, could you go over the other, the dates of the utility forum and then the other, the utility workshop on the 5th? And then our other community forums?
The next 4 101s, they're on Wednesday nights, the next 4 weeks. The next one will be on development. And we'll also have one on public safety. You have the other two, transportation, and I'm missing one. I don't know why I'm missing one.
Everyone's trying to come to my aid. I love this.
Well,
Though I appreciate it.
Right.
So let's see, we've got economic vitality and development. So Ms. Merwin and Mr. Romine will be back again. That's on August 28th. We have the transportation forum on September 4th, the elections forum on September 11th, and we have the public safety forum on September 25th. We also, last evening, we held a workshop regarding the utility rate increase and enterprise funds. A similar workshop will be done on September 5th. And so that's coming up. In that location will be here. So it's a newer location. Last night's was at the Lakeshore Room and at the Broomfield Community Center. But on the 5th, it'll be back in this building as well. There's also a study session planned with the City Council in September. And there are also 2 study sessions regarding the budget. So we have lots of opportunities to learn about the budget, the enterprise funds, and then all the topics that were mentioned, the elections and transportation. So lots of things going on in the next few weeks. So that will be a lot of different topics. So we have both the transportation planning manager will be taking about half of the presentation, and we'll also have the traffic engineer. So we'll be talking about traffic safety and kicking off the safety plan that is currently being kicked off and led through this year by our traffic engineer. We'll also be talking about regional planning, infrastructure, so bike lanes, improvements. We're going to be kicking off the transportation plan for Broomfield. We update that about every 10 years with our comprehensive plan. And so that will be talked about a little bit. She'll be talking about some of the grants that have been awarded to Broomfield and what that money will be used for. So there's a lot of different topics. I think that that's a really valuable 101. So if you're not able to make it, these are recorded and you're always welcome to watch those recordings. And it's really helpful if you can provide questions ahead of time, especially for the transportation forum, since there's such, like you said, a broad range of topics that they can cover. If you can let us know what you're interested in by telling us your questions in advance, that's really helpful. Sure. One more question. So the question is probably for you, Jeff. Sorry. So the question, I'll repeat it for those online and so that Jeff can join us at the front, was there was a statement in the slide about 1.9% inflation, but really we see all the time on the news about 20% inflation. So where's the difference in the numbers?
So the inflation numbers that I get come directly from the federal government, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They are the ones that calculated each year. And each quarter, and that's what's reported. And those are the numbers that are officially used. So that is the amount that is the change in prices over the last year over year, 1.9%. They were just released last week. They are considered the authority and have been for 30 or 40, probably 50 years easily on inflation. And that's the numbers that everybody reports. So I don't know any prices. I don't know of anybody that's saying prices have increased 20% in the last year. But I'm just telling you where that number comes from.
Just want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.